really ought to do is thank everyone in my team, the Cox&Co team, who, like all payroll professionals up and down the country, have done sterling work. An incredible amount of hard work has gone into getting people paid on time. And as you'll see, as we lay out the scheme as it is and the difficulties we faced, you'll see what we've been up against. I think we appreciate that everyone in their own businesses has had great challenges to face. And, you know, we appreciate that most people, or if not all people, have worked very closely with us to make sure that we're able to do what we need to do. And as I say, that, you know, there's been no let up at our end. So, yeah, I'd like to say, hopefully it'll end at some point soon, but I don't think there's any prospect of that. It feels like we're all in a computer game, the Matrix or something, and suddenly a whole new level's been opened up, FFS2. And we've now got to face the new challenge. So without further ado, I'll ask Tracy to put the first slide up, and we'll move through the presentation.
I would, but sorry, Steve. Oh, there we go.
Excellent, thank you very much. So yeah, this is just a layout of what we expect to cover. Firstly, we're going to look at eligibility. That's going to be pretty much a fairly short look at it, because the reality is that if anyone is considering flexible furloughing, then by definition, almost all employees you can consider would have at some point been furloughed. A couple of exceptions which we'll cover, but in essence, if you're not eligible for FFS1, CJRS2, the first scheme, you won't be eligible for the second, and vice versa. So we'll quickly go over the important parts of that, but it won't be too long. We'll look at the claim periods, we'll look at the exceptions. Quite a lot has changed with the second part of the scheme, the revenge. You know, that previously you could make claims for periods that crossed the beginning and end of months. There were no difficulties with that. Under the new scheme, because each month a different set of rules will apply and a different claim regime will apply, it means that every claim has to deal with a month in isolation, or part of a month, but nothing can move or nothing can cross the 31st of July to the 1st of August. It has to be 1st of July to 31st of July, 1st of August to 31st of August, etc. So that's one of the big changes. We're going to look at the calculations involved in overview. So the things that have now become terms that we'll deal with on a day-to-day basis that we didn't know a few weeks ago, a bit like furloughing. I think, you know, no one had heard of that when it was first announced in the Commons. It was a case of Google it, get your dictionary out and find out what is furloughing. I mean, we all knew kind of what it meant, but it's now one of those terms that you bandy around, and CJRS and FFS, it's just terms that yeah, we're bandying around for a past time now that we hadn't heard of 6 months ago. So we're going to look at a couple of scenarios. Our scenarios are convenient people. They're the best of the bunch that we all have in our businesses. They work nice, you know, Monday to Friday, and beginning to the end of the month is when they're paid, etc. So we haven't got complicated, because we want to try and make it clear what we're actually looking at and the way, the general approach. Obviously, there are lots of ifs, buts and maybes about individual people within individual businesses, and lots of complications along the way, but we've covered off some of the basic scenarios. We looked at a fixed hours person, a typical office-based person who works Monday 9 till 5 or something similar. He actually works Monday 9 till 4:30, but the principle's the same. And then we're looking at somebody who works variable hours, because yeah, the rules are different. The way you establish the baseline, if you like, is different. And then we'll look at what we need in terms of the new world. So there are certain things that we cannot do without, and that should become evident through the calculation screens. But if it doesn't, then we're going to set those out so that everyone is kind of clear what we need to do the job. So, you know, there are just things that we can't do without. We're not in a position to second guess them, which we might ordinarily manage to do, but they're so critical that we need to get that information. So what hours do they work? What hours what hours do they normally work, what hours did they work under the flexible furlough, etc. So we'll cover that as well. So if I could have the next slide, please, Tracy. So eligibility, the headlines on that so we need to know, is the employee eligible to be flexibly furloughed? And as I say, in essence, the criteria remain unchanged. Some of them we've almost forgotten because they're so long ago. So the employee had to have been on the FPS submission before the 19th of March 2020. So that was one that changed in the early part of the, when the guidelines were being issued, maybe version 3, maybe version 4, it came to pass that the 19th of March was a critical date. Subsequently, lots of energy has been expended online and in forums about the validity of the 19th of March, but it is what it is. If they were on the RTI submission at that point, they're eligible. If they're on a submission on the 20th, then they're not. And it's very black and white, unfortunately, because a lot of it's around the timing of when you made your submission, not when the payroll was run or when they were paid or when they joined the business. They must have completed a full 3-week period of furlough prior to the 30th of June 2020. So they must have had a 3-week period. In other words, if they weren't furloughed before the 10th of June, if they weren't furloughed before the 10th of June, then they won't be eligible because they didn't get that 3-week period in. It's okay if they're, they entered a subsequent period of furlough on maybe the 28th of June or something. That's perfectly fine, so long as they've got that 3-week qualifying period prior to the end of June, then that's all fine. They must have been included in a CJRS grant claim before the 31st of July 2020, and that's a critical one as well, much like the 19th of March was a critical date. So we could have been gaily furloughing people since March. There was no obligation to make a claim. You knew you could do it at some point, and initially it was taught that you'd be able to do it within, for a number of years after the event, so that was fine. With the introduction of flexible furloughing and the new legislation, it means that those claims must be made before the 31st of July. So obviously the clock is now ticking. Where we've administered claims, we know that will happen. If you're administering claims, you need to take a similar, similar sort of level of interest to make sure that those claims go in on or before the 31st of July, because if it's the 1st of August, it will be too late. And if we're doing the claim on your behalf and you haven't seen, if you've seen a claim at this point in time, that's fine, you've got a claim in. And because of the cash flow implications, obviously, most of them aren't hanging around too long, but we set out at the outset that we couldn't do claims until the payroll was run and closed. Whereas a number of our clients have obviously done claims in advance because the cash flow implications meant they needed the cash. So, but where we do a claims, it's based on fact, not what might happen. And that becomes even more critical as we embark on the next phase. An interesting one, the number of employees in a claim cannot exceed the high watermark defined by previous claims. So in other words, you could have made a number of claims prior to making a claim under the new furlough arrangements, but the number of people you can include on a claim under new furlough has a cap on it, and that cap is determined by the maximum that you had in a previous claim. So if you made a claim in April and it included 20 employees, you made one in May and it included 50, and you made one in June and it included 20 again. Your high point is 50, and you can't make a claim with more than 50 in it, except in the circumstances below. If someone wasn't furloughed because they were on family leave, or because of bereavement, or because they were a reservist in active service and have subsequently come back into the workplace. If those circumstances apply, then there's a need to contact HMRC, and they will manually increase the high water mark so that those people can be included in a claim if needs be. So it's just something to bear in mind, that it might be a case that you want to furlough 50, but you can only furlough 30. So it's a strange restriction. I guess it's you know, the logic is you're bringing people back to work rather than bringing them onto furlough, so the number should reduce. But it's another of these random things that seems to have popped in. So yeah, next slide, please. In terms of the calculation sequence, the calculation itself is not complicated. Anyone with degree level algebra or statistics is going to be able to embark on it, I think, without any problems at all. No, I joking aside, it's that the actual calculations aren't too complicated in simple cases. They do get complicated by lots of other things. But if you look at what I've got on the slide there, the things that you require or you need in order to approach the calculations are as we set out there. So you need the usual hours, and usual hours is a term pretty much invented for the purposes of FFS2. It's not one that you would ordinarily have come across, and if you did, it wouldn't be the same usual hours that you'll come up with under a furlough calculation. It would, you know, you might think someone working 40 hours a week, their usual hours is 40 hours a week. That wouldn't be an unreasonable thing to think, but under furlough calculations, of course, that would be totally unreasonable because it's common sense, and that really takes a back seat. So the usual hours we'll go into in a minute, what they are and how you work them out. The working hours, and that's the one that we should all be comfortable with, and if there's anything that we'll all know, it's how many hours did that employee work once they'd returned from their, come back on a part-time basis on flexible furlough. You will have arranged how many hours they're going to work, and that should be a figure that we know, especially if it's in retrospectively, and we're not trying to fathom it out in advance. The furloughed hours, and that's, as I say, straightforward. A minus B equals C. So that is as simple as it gets. And these hours are, they have a purpose, but the names are not too important. And then we move on, having looked at the calculations, looked at the numbers that we need for those. We've then worked through what they're actually going to get paid and how we've come up with those figures. So for each of the examples that we've looked at, we've worked out what their working pay is. So the pay for the hours that they've worked. We've worked out what their furloughed pay is. So the payment for the furloughed hours that we've calculated. And then the top up, if it applies, obviously throughout furlough, topping up to 100% or 90% or any other level of income has been permissible. The only restriction is you must pay at least the 80%. So if you want to top up, you can do, and that does continue under flexible furloughing. And just as an aside, flexible furloughing is now the term that covers everything. So anything that was full furlough previously, so the normal furlough, the 3-week blocks, etc., that can continue going forward, and it makes the calculations a little easier, but it will still be called flexible furlough. Part-time working with partial furloughing is also flexible furloughing, and if you end your furlough period and come back to work, that, for the purposes of the claim, is also flexible furloughing. So it covers a multitude of sins. So yeah, that's it with that slide. Oh, and then the CJRS claim. Actually, I will mention that because we've concentrated on the calculations and getting the pay right, because as payrollers, that's pretty much what we need to do. We need to make sure that the payroll is correctly calculated and the employees are correctly paid. The CJRS claims are something that follows in their wake. So if we're doing it, we're fully appreciative of what needs to be done to get to the claim figure. And for our clients who are doing it themselves, they're clearly fully appreciative of what's involved as well. So, but I will try and go back to it briefly once I've got through the slides. Thank you. Next slide, please. I love this next slide, please. It's such a feeling of power. Oh, no, back one, isn't it? Or is it? No, that's it. So usual hours, and usual hours, as I say, is a term that's been invented for the job. lots of invention going on in furloughing. I think Rishi stood in the Commons and invented something yesterday which got people very excited. I'm not sure he'd mentioned it to anyone before he stood up, but that's another story. So usual hours, and it's really the cornerstone that underpins everything that we do in flexible furloughing. It's the definition of usual hours. Because as I say, once you've got usual hours, you know the hours they worked, and by definition, you can then do the furlough calculations. But usual hours, unusual term, so we just need to look at what that is. And the usual hours will be different. There are employees who are, on a fixed number of hours, and then there are variable people who receive variable pay, and they all have usual hours, but some will be more usual than others. So if we look first at an employee who works a fixed number of hours every week, as I say, he's someone who represents a lot of what we do. He's in the office 5 days a week. He works Monday to Friday. He's your typical salaried employee. And in order to determine determine the usual number of hours for that employee, we need to look at the last pay period that ended on or before the 19th of March 2020. So it's that key date again. And it will have an impact on people who've changed their salary during sort of February, March, April time, because it can have an impact on what you can reclaim, because it's based on that point in time. So for a normal monthly paid employee who is being paid for the calendar month, the salary you'll be looking at is the one for February. So the contract hours. In order to determine their usual hours, you first need to divide it by the number of days in their repeating work pattern. So as its name suggests, the repeating work pattern is for a typical employee, it would be 5 days. But the critical thing with usual hours is everything is done in calendar days. So we've dispensed with working days as an idea for the purposes of furlough. They really don't come into play at all. They will come into play when you determine the pay for hours worked, but they have no real meaning in furloughing. And that's because if you're furloughed under the original definition, you're not working, and therefore what is a working day? It's non-existent. It has no validity, and so it doesn't it isn't used. So you look at the repeating work pattern. Typically, people are repeating their work pattern over 7 days, 1 week. The following week they do the same. The following week they do the same. But it's not unusual for people to work 4 days on and 4 days off. So that would be an 8-day repeating work pattern. And they might have more complicated working patterns. So they could be working over 3 weeks, for example. A working pattern that's on a three-week repeating cycle. So you need to determine that, and then you need to multiply it by the number of days in the pay period. So as I say, our examples, we've looked at 4 months to keep it nice and simple, but that needn't necessarily be the case, and particularly if it's moving from 1 month to the next, it may not be the case. But for a monthly paid employee, it will typically be the case. So that is the way you determine the usual hours for the purposes of calculation. For an employee on variable hours, can we skip back to that last? That's all right, thanks. Then again, theirs are looked at differently in the same way that their pay has been determined by looking at 2 things. And it will be determined either by their average for 2019-2020 or the equivalent, the comparable pay period. So each time you carry out a furlough calculation, you're looking at the average for 2019-2020 or the equivalent comparable pay period for the previous year. So if we're looking at July, we'd be looking at July 2019. We're then picking the biggest one, and that's the one we use for calculations going forward. And so we're doing that on every pay period. We're referring back to previous pay periods to make sure that the correct one is picked, if you like. So you can skip on to the next one now, Tracy. Thank you. Calculating the worked hours is what we would hope is the simplest part of the exercise, because typically, and certainly with someone who's on a fixed working pattern, it should be fairly straightforward. If we have an employee who's working 2 days per week, at 7.5 hours each day, and you would multiply it by the number of days they worked in the pay period. So if we take July as an example, for a Monday to Friday worker, there were 23 working days. Dependent on the working pattern, depending on the working pattern, a number of those days will be worked at the number of hours in a day that they work. But of course, they could be working half days. So you would then take their normal working pattern and look at it in those terms. So you're actually measuring the hours they have actually worked. And for a variable pay or employee on variable pay, you're looking at what they did actually work. So, they may be coming in on an ad hoc basis according to the way the business is performing at that point in time. And so you would take the number of hours that they have actually worked. And this hopefully will become a bit clearer when we move on to the sort of the actual calculations. Well, it might not, of course. And the working hours will be defined in line with the terms and conditions of employment that apply on that employee's return to work. So as part of the furlough return to work, in the same way when employees were furloughed, you will have agreed the terms and conditions of employment with them in writing, so it's clear what is going to happen. They don't need to respond to that, so you tell them. They needn't necessarily say, yes, I agree. That's not a requirement, but it is a requirement that you do tell them and in writing. And then you must keep those records for 5 years. As I said earlier today, it's interesting, they picked 5 years. You keep your PAYE records for 3 years, your tax records for 6 years, and it's like they had a spot for 5 years. It's almost, I was surprised they didn't pick 4 years and 6 months, which would have made it even more difficult for people to understand what they were looking at. Anyway, on to the next screen where I think we get into some nitty gritty. Oh, not quite. Oh, the easiest calculation of the day. So you've worked out their usual hours. You know what their worked hours are because they've worked them. And one minus the other gives you the furloughed hours that you will use in your calculations. So A minus B equals C. It almost takes you back to school. It's something you can say, yeah, I get that. Which is good. There aren't many things in this that you can say, yes, I understand that completely, but that is definitely one of them. So yeah, next one, please. So for our examples, we've picked, as I say, some simple souls, and I was going to call this guy Simple Steve because it is straightforward, and if I call him Steve, I can only offend myself, so that's okay. But we called him Fixed Fred. And as the name would suggest, he is the guy that I've referred to a number of times up to now. He works in an office. He's worked there since 2016. So he's obviously, he's been there a while. He earns £25,000 per annum, which we will need to know in the calculations. He works 5 days a week. And if it isn't mentioned at some point, his working pattern is Monday to Friday. His normal working pattern. He's a full-time worker. He comes, he does his job, he goes. He doesn't earn any commission or bonus or other pay. He is just as straightforward an example as we could find. He's the sort of example that HMRC would have based their guidelines on before they appreciated that there were people who were paid weekly or fortnightly or 4 weekly, or people who had the audacity to do strange working patterns. So he's the guy that this was all designed around, I think. And he was furloughed on the 1st of May, and therefore he is eligible for FFS, Flexible Furlough Scheme. Other things have been associated with that acronym. I think F's suit lots of words. Most of them are derogatory, so we leave that to your imagination. He's going to return to work on the 1st of July. Again, happy soul, no trouble to anyone, this guy. You want him to come back to work on a Thursday or a Wednesday, I think it was, wasn't it? That's fine. He's no trouble at all. So he's going to start at the beginning of a month. So just to ease those complicated calculations. He's paid calendar monthly, again, no trouble at all, and he's going to earn 80% of pay while he's furloughed. On the right hand side, we've got his contracted hours, which are 37.5 over 7, so that's his weekly contracted hours over his regular working pattern, which is a 7-day working pattern. Again, calendar days, not working days. He only works 5. This is based on calendar days, as with most things furlough. So 37.5 over 7 gives you his daily hours, if you like. And then for the period that we're looking at, you multiply it by 31, because we're looking at the period from the 1st to the 31st of July inclusive. And that gives you a figure of 166 point something. With this particular aspect of furloughing, we're going to round up. You'll find that as we move on, I may pass comment because these things irritate me. In this case, you always round up. I think the general principle is the rounding that's applied is to the benefit of the employee, so it maximizes the claim. But there are several examples of rounding within the calculations, and they do go both ways. And when HMRC issued the first FFS2 guidelines, they were different and they had the rounding wrong, and they've subsequently changed it. So you have to keep your eye on the rounding. You can't forget it. But in this case, it's a simple round up. To determine his working, or the days he's worked, his working hours, we're looking at the calendar for this, and I haven't got the calendar in front of me, but I think from memory, he worked 5 Wednesdays, 5 Thursdays, and 5 Fridays. Because he was coming back on a Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday working pattern. And so he's worked 15 days, and he's worked 15 days times 7.5 hours. So 15 normal days he's worked. And so he's worked 112.5 hours. And that means that his furloughed hours are A minus B, his contracted hours, sorry, his usual hours. I've got contracted hours there, which in this case is correct terminology. But when we move on to variable pay, usual hours is the correct term. And it can be, as I say, it can be either here, but usual hours is the better one to get in your heads, I think. So 1 minus the other gives an answer of 54.5, and that will be carried forward to the next part of the calculation. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. So to calculate fixed Fred's furlough pay, it's a bit of a tongue twister actually. I really should have thought something. Fixed Fred's, lots of F's again actually. In any case, his usual wage is £25,000 per annum, split equally over 12 months, giving a monthly usual wage of £2,083.33. 80% of his usual wage is therefore £1,666.66. And his furlough pay will therefore be, it's 54.5 hours, his furlough hours, divided by 167, his usual hours, times £1,666.66, which is his usual wage. And if you throw them all together, and they come out the other end, and the answer is £543.91. So that is the amount he will be paid in furlough pay. More accurately, it's the amount you will be able to reclaim in furlough pay. The two may not be the same, and I'll comment on that later, but yeah, there's no requirement for the furlough pay that you calculate using normal payroll calculations to be the same as the furlough pay that the government is going to repay you. The important thing is the furlough pay that you pay is what matches what you've agreed to pay in the written T's and C's, or contract of employment. T's and C's is obviously terms and conditions, relates to other things, but anyway, contract of employment as amended under furlough. So next slide, please. In terms of, so we've dealt with the furlough element, now we need to deal with Fred's hours that he's actually worked. And this is, again, a fairly straightforward calculation. The important point to note here is that here we'd worry about things that we haven't previously worried about. So we wouldn't have worried about the national minimum wage when we dealt with furlough, because the national minimum wage it doesn't have any bearing on it. It's not relevant. They're not working. They're not subject to the national minimum wage unless they're carrying out training hours, in which case they must be paid the appropriate rate. But in general terms, furlough ignores any national minimum wage requirements. But once we move on to hours that Fred's worked, then all that comes back into play and we need to worry about it. In this case, he's well above, so it's not a problem. But yeah, it will be something that we all need to think about, particularly as employees have been furloughed perhaps since March. The national minimum wage changes came into being in April, and as a consequence of that, they may just have been missed or forgotten or ignored or whatever. So you just need to make sure that as people return to work, those national minimum rates are applied correctly. So Fred has, we've established his hourly rate, £12.82. Some people would divide it by 260 point whatever, which gives a slightly smaller one, but we don't, payrollers don't generally. But of course there are 52.143 weeks in a year, and so it should be slightly more than 260. The number of hours he's worked is 112.5. So we're just going to do a straightforward multiplication. 112.5 hours at £12.82 per hour. That means that the pay for the hours he's worked, he's going to receive is 1442.25. So that's the two main elements dealt with. So we've got his furlough pay, 543.91. The pay for the hours he's worked, 1442.25, giving a total gross pay of 1986.16. And we would generally be showing that as separate elements on the pay slip. Particularly the hours worked would be X hours at, just to make it very clear. Some employers are then making a top up as well, so you would also make any adjustment required. So a furlough top up, again, that's what we would probably call it on the pay slip. Now, some clients are retrospect, all this is happening after the event. A client has said, we want to pay them 100% as if they were there. And so some of this is done, in the background afterwards. But as a general rule, it might be dealt with up front. So his pay slip's he's going to get his normal 208,333. And so we show a furlough top up of 97.17. So that's what the guy is going to be paid. Next slide, please. And then I've added this for completeness, really. Those of you who are making claims will be aware of the way that NICs and pension are calculated. The fact that you have to prorate the threshold and do lots of jiggery pokery. Pensions, you can only claim 3% the auto-enrollment minimum requirement. Lots of people make substantially bigger contributions than that, but of course you can't claim them. But I've added that it's only an issue for July, because from August onwards, then it won't be reclaimable any longer. So at that point, the furlough scheme, the reclaim amounts begin to diminish. But I've added it. But if we're doing a claim, then we're doing all this anyway, and we'll be glad to see the back of it when it all finally disappears at the end of July. So next slide, please. Our second example is variable Vera. I don't come up with these names, by the way. So Vera is a pub worker, irregular hours. She earns £10 an hour, which increased from £9 an hour effective from the 1st of April 2020. She's on a 0 hours contract, so can work various shifts at various times. We have gone through the rigors of determining what her average number of hours were. So we've calculated it on an annual basis, because I think this girl has been with us for more than 12 months. So we've gone through, we've calculated the average for the previous 12 months. We've looked at the July pay for last year. And this is a weekly paid employee. So we've, some additional steps that we've had to go through there, looking at 2 weeks, apportioning accordingly. She's eligible for FFS, and she, as I say, she's returning on an ad hoc basis. It's going to be paid weekly, and in the particular week we're going to look at, she worked 8 hours. So as I say, we've determined her usual hours as 15. She's worked 8, and so we can do the A minus B equals C calculation, and her furlough hours that we will pay will be 7. So here's the calculation set out. It's, yeah, it doesn't come much more straightforward than this one. So she's normally, her usual hours are 15. As I say, we've looked at the options, and the best pay outcome, the one that gives her the most money, is as based on the best hours outcome was 15 hours. We've also done the same exercise with her pay, and the best outcome in terms of pay on comparing average with comparable pay period is £135, which is conveniently 15 times 10, but that's just a happy coincidence. And she is going to get 80% of that usual wage, which is 135 times 80.8, sorry, 80%, £108. And her furlough pay will be calculated as the furloughed hours, 7, over her usual hours, 15, times her usual wage, £108, and that gives a total of £50.40. So that is what we're going to pay her in furlough. Then we move on to her pay for hours worked. Now, this is a situation where, yeah, you would have noted that the furlough calculation was based on a rate of pay that applied during the period we were looking at. Conveniently, she changed on the 1st of April. It might not have been as clear cut as that. The important thing is that it's based on the past. It's based on a point in time, and it happens to be £9 an hour. Now she's working, we need to pay her what she's contracted to be paid, which is £10 an hour. So nice and simple. 8 hours at £10, £80. Jobs are good, as they say. Next slide, that's it. So Bureau is going to get a total of £50.40 furlough pay, £80 for the hours that she's worked, and her total gross pay will therefore be £130.40. Again, the option exists to top up to 100% or any other figure, as long as it's more than 80. We've certainly seen a number of employers top up to 90%, having topped up to 100 for a period and then reduced to 90. So that's variable VERA. So that's all pretty straightforward, I feel. Not too bad. Unfortunately, we have picked conveniently pleasant examples, and life does get complicated. In real life, gets really complicated. So there are a few things that we will have perhaps considered as we were doing it, or will come to light during the calculation process or during the claim process. They don't always become apparent, because someone says pay them 100% of their salary. That's a clear instruction. It's not a problem to do that bit. We're just paying them normal money. What we call it is not too worrying. When we come to do the claim, of course, different problems manifest themselves. And so this is a few of the things that you come across. First one I've got is reconciliation, pay versus reclaim. I can't make this claim, I can't make this point too often, that what you reclaim doesn't have to equal what you paid. We had one client who was determined to carry out a reconciliation process, but there's nothing to reconcile against. You know, you're generally calculating. If you've told someone you want to pay it 100%, then how you get to the answer is not of concern to them. And it may well be that what you actually claim doesn't have a close resemblance to what you've shown on a payslip, for example. So it's just making that distinction between the two. There can be differences, not necessarily the same thing. Alignment with claim periods, something we hadn't had to worry about until 1st of July, because we didn't have to align with claim periods because everything was based on pay periods. If the pay period ran from the 20th of April through to the 19th of May, so be it, not a problem. We could do the calculations. It's not a problem at all. If that situation now exists and they're being paid from the 20th of June to the 19th of July, suddenly you have to worry about the fact that you can't cross the line with your claims. And so that creates orphan periods, a term that we'd never heard before as payrollers. It's like a lot of terms that have come into being in the recent past. Not to concern you, I don't think it's covered on the HMRC webinar. I've got slides of it, but I decided to omit them because I think actually it's just too much information. Just be aware nothing is as straightforward as it seems, and you won't go far wrong. Salary sacrifice pension arrangements, brilliant fun. Because of course all claims are based on post-salary sacrifice pay and not notional pay, which is what you might base an awful lot of things on in real life. And of course that diminishes the value that you can claim. And it changes the way things appear on the payslip, and you have an obligation to make those salary sacrifice employer contributions regardless. So there's lots of complications that come out after or when you're doing a claim. Variable pay top up. So where you've got variable pay, determining what part of the variable pay elements is top up and what part is a furlough is not always clear cut. I think that's all I can say on that. It's not always straightforward. I've got some marvelously fantastic spreadsheets that have huge numbers of columns on just to get to the bottom of salary sacrifice and variable pay top up. Then you've got holiday pay top up, because of course holiday pay legislation doesn't go away just because we've moved into a new normal. It's sat there hovering in the background waiting to bite you. All employees have the right to receive their full daily rate for any day when they're on holiday. So it's, in April and May when there were bank holidays, it was something that was dealt with pretty regularly. That sort of 20% that you had to add on top to make sure that that could be called holiday. Of course, it was great because the government was funding 80% of the holiday pay that you would have had to make anyway. But of course, it's going to return in August. There'll obviously be the August bank holiday at the end of the month, so holiday top-up will make a comeback. We look forward to it. Returners, people who've come back from, for example, parental leave, calculations aren't as simple for them because for part of the period you're making reference to, they won't have been paid their normal pay, they would have been paid maybe SMP. And so you have to adjust to take account of the fact that they would normally have earned a higher amount of money, and so you have to make an adjustment, which is why it's so difficult to do these average pay calculations, because there are so many things in the mix. Rounding, just a pet hate. Make up your mind what you're going to round, how you're going to round it, and then we'll all know where we are. Guideline fine-tuning, that's a complication all of its own, really. We're currently, I believe, on iteration 17 of the guidelines, but I might have missed one or two, and it's perfectly possible. They generally come out on a Friday night. Bank holidays were particularly popular, so that payrollers could spend the weekend just comparing version 8 with version 9 and determining what had changed. There was always something. It wasn't always something that really lit your fire. We have a specialist in our team who spends her weekends looking at it. Her name's Katie. I'll give her a mention because she just loves it. You can tell her there's a new version coming out and she's on it. And we're expecting Friday of this week a further iteration of the guidelines. As I say, could be version 18 or it could be version 19. It might have overtaken COVID-19 by the time we get to the next bank holiday. Software limitations, I really only mention that really just to get some sympathy, really. because I think, we make great demands of our software, but realistically, as I've alluded to, 17 versions of the guidelines. I am aware that software developers got, versions that didn't even hit the ground in the end. We're expected to put together functionality within their software to help us or help users along the way with the calculations. I think software developers, typically 6 to 9 month lead time, and they're getting a spec on a Friday night, expected to put it into some form of operation, and then the spec changes. So I think we've had to adopt an awful lot of manual processes to deal with what ordinarily in the general scheme of things would be dealt with through software. And even if the software had instantly been correct, there are so many things that need to be considered. So we would have had to take a trip back in time and determine in advance which pay elements were discretionary overtime, for example. Was it discretionary bonuses or discretionary commission or all these type of things? At the moment, we have to define whether it's pensionable, whether it's NIable, whether it's taxable. For the software to do any of the work or the bulk of the work, we would have needed to define those criteria under furlough, which, as I say, is constantly changing. So software hasn't been very helpful. It's been very much a case of get the guidelines, work it through the government calculators, make sure you understand the principles involved, and then move on, knowing full well that it won't last more than a week or two. So that's that. What to include in your payroll submission? So I think by now it will become clear that things that we don't generally require or use on a day-to-day basis when we run your payroll are now much more important than they were. And the next slide will take you through some of those things. So some of these things we just don't really need to know. I mean, we often do. If we're calculating an overtime rate at time and a half, by definition, we need to know how many hours constitute an annual, the annual salary or whatever. So we'll know some of them, but we won't know all of them. So how many hours in their contract? We've probably got a shout with that. We probably, for a lot of our clients, we know that. How many hours a day or shift do they work? That's quite granular. We won't know that in a lot of cases. And if we knew it 3 months ago, in all likelihood, it is one of those moving feasts. If someone used to work Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and now they work Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, we won't know that. HR department will probably know it because they agreed it. Operations will know it, but we won't know it. So, but we'll need it, as you can see, to determine the hours they've actually worked. We need that information. What's the shift arrangement? So as a general, how do they work their shifts? So the more information, working pattern is what it boils down to. What's the pay period? Again, seemingly straightforward type of thing, isn't it? I mean, monthly they're paid for the month, weekly they're paid for the week. But are they paid from Sunday to Saturday, or are they paid from Monday to Sunday? Lots of variations on a theme. Some of it we know because it's required for automatic enrolment purposes, but sometimes we won't. So again, don't assume we know everything, because we might not. Don't get me wrong, we'll ask you if it's not there, but it would help if it is. And what days of the week do they work, working pattern again. Worked hours, that's something that even with our payroll heads on, unless you tell us what they did work, we will not have any idea whatsoever. So it's really telling us what we need to know. Working hourly rate. So tell us the rate at which they're going to be paid, because as we've already sort of alluded to, it may not be their normal working rate. Perhaps, you may have taken people off furlough, they may be covering additional responsibilities or whatever, and it may be different. So make it clear if it's a different hourly rates are the norm, again with overtime hours and bonus and commission. So yeah, as much information as we can get our hands on, really. So yeah, with the previous slide in mind, we get lots of interesting things that we generally interpret, do our best to interpret, make an educated guess. But the reality is that we don't always know. So don't tell us they're full-time. Be specific about what that full-time is. Is it 37.5 hours Monday to Friday, or is it something different? If it's 2 days a week, which days is it? Because as we've already discovered, it will make a difference to the calculations. As and when 30 hours over their shift, yeah, it's all about being specific, telling us things instead of letting us work it out. In terms of our worked hours, full-time as normal. Same again, really. Same as Payroll. Obviously, we always know what Payroll did, so that's okay. But the others, yeah, make it clear. Working hourly rates. So again, it's about giving us numbers, not allowing us to make educated guesses, really. Spreadsheets and timesheets. Most people submit their payroll in some form of spreadsheet, and it's just about making sure that you've got the relevant columns to supply the relevant information, so that we're not sat there guessing. I mean, we were asked, certainly in the early days, what information do you need? And the trouble is, it's different for all. So over time, we've discovered the information we need, and we've worked with our clients to make sure that they provide it. And I think it's just a case of extending that cooperation and making sure that we're not left guessing. So I reckon that's pretty much near the end now, guys. Oh, no. Okay, yeah. Together we can get through this. Well, we must be halfway. Well, nearly halfway. Well, it depends who you listen to, I suppose. So yeah, it's been hard work, but we're getting there. But I think this is a whole new level of complexity, of calculation, of things that need to be done. So as I say, yeah, we're Payroll. We do we always get things done, but Payroll, for the same payroll that we did 6 months ago, it's probably taking 2 to 3 times longer to process the same. Not in all cases. There will be people who are listening who I can certainly think of where it's become marginally easier. But in general terms, almost nothing comes through that we don't have to question or check or ask questions that we didn't need to know the answers before. Now we do, and it all takes time. So it's about collating the information, making the submissions as quickly as you can, asking questions before the submissions are made, allowing us to ask questions afterwards. Processing is, as I say, taking longer. So yeah, we want to get it to you as quickly as we can, because check-in becomes more important. That sense check-in, as I say, hourly rates are changing as people return to work, as national minimum wage kicks in, and the human side of what we're doing currently is not to be underestimated. We're all used to working at a certain level of pressure. The way Payroll works is it tends to be an absolute massive activity towards the end of the month, and we're all pressured because timelines are a constant bombardment at the best of times. But under the current circumstances, if we take 2 or 3 times as long to run a payroll, the human side of it and the complexity and level of calculation. I mean, I kind of make light of the simple A minus B equals C. But when your brain's frazzled and you've seen the calculation umpteen times, and you've just looked at someone on variable pay, and you've looked at pay period last year, you looked at their average pay, and you've done it for 30 on that payroll, and you move on to something that's seemingly straightforward. Even if it is straightforward and you get it right first time, you do start to question what you've done. all of us have been, you know, the things that you would take in your stride without a second thought, you suddenly think, is it right? I need to check with Dr. Katie and make sure that it is right. Yeah, allow us the time to do that. Be patient, as we try to be patient too, because it's just mad. I mean, we all know it's mad in so many senses of the word at the moment. And payroll is as mad as anything else. I always liken it to a hamster wheel, constantly, frantically running around a hamster wheel, and if just for a moment you stop running, then you just fall off. And you know, none of us have fallen off yet, but we just need to make sure that this tougher bit, doesn't cause any problems. So I think that's probably it, but I could be wrong. Yes, the end, or is it the beginning of a new furlough world?
Well, thank you very much, Steve. I was enjoying watching the cup going backwards and forwards to the mouth. You might actually want to get a drink.
Oh, I didn't know you could see me.
Yeah, I can see you, so I'm sure everybody else can see you. So yeah,
oh, what?
Very enjoyable. So
I was relaxed. No,
I know
help.
you were relaxed, Jen. Anyway, so what we'll do is, well, we've got a choice now. We can either unmute everybody and we just go for it, or we can just, if anybody wants to raise their hand, I can find you and see if I can unmute you.
Because I can't see anything by end. That was my choice, wasn't it? Bloody hell. Oh, well.
So,
you live and learn, don't you? Next time I do one, I'll know.
How about if we unmute everybody and then we can all breathe relief, okay? Right, so hopefully...
My nervous cup's swigging.
Right, I'm hoping that you're all unmuted now, hopefully. And if you're not, you're welcome to unmute yourself.
I'm trying to find how I get everyone on my screen. All I can see is Julie. Is there anyone else?
I have a question, if I can ask a question.
Yeah, bear with me. I'm just trying to get to the point where I can see other people. It's a bit weird. Bear with me. Maybe I just...
It's on Tracy's screen.
Sorry, we're not very good at all of this, are we?
No, it's all new. As you can see, I didn't realise I was on camera. Oops.
Yeah, I seem to be unmuting people, but they're not unmuting. So anyway, if you can hear us, then well done. And if you can't, we do apologise. You just saw some screens go by without actually any words. But we are recording it, so hopefully we can make it available for anybody who didn't get anything.
Oh, that's filled me with enthusiasm. Brilliant.
Right, okay, so I just need to get everybody's... So what I can do now is I'll just stop sharing, okay? And then
now I can see everyone.
I can see everybody now. Okay. There we all are. Okay. So if somebody's got a question, then by all means, somebody just has to take it in turns. I think, who had a question? Was it Julie?
Yes, please. Sorry if I missed this. I unfortunately joined the call a little bit later than planned. So it was around the original A minus B equals C calculation. So my main question was around how we would be calculating contracted hours. I thought I'd have the answer, and actually you've given me a different one. So we would normally have our full-time hours are 37. So I was either expecting it to be actual hours worked in July, had they worked them, or our 160.77, which is our monthly full-time hours.
Right.
Whereas this is different again, isn't it?
It is, yeah. No, it is different. So it would be, and yours might be further complicated. I don't know whether anyone works over 2-week patterns. There's some strange ones, aren't there? No? Okay.
I don't think so. So for us, it'd be 37 hours
37
divided by
over 7
times by 31, which gives us 163.85.
Yeah, which you round up.
So 164. And so is that what... So that's not you saying that, that's what HMRC is saying?
That's what HMRC say, yeah.
Okay, I shall inform our financial controller.
I'm sure he'll be more than happy to adjust his spreadsheets accordingly.
He was expecting it to be a percentage.
Well, if I'm brutally honest, I think, I mean, throughout, almost from day one, well, actually day one, this bit you know, even going back, it wasn't clear from day one that it would be based on calendar days, any of it. And so initially, most payrollers operate on working days in one form or another. And the early point, you know, they actually said if you've done your calculations on that basis, that's fine, because, you know, how could you see what was
going
to happen in the future? But yeah, if you're going to do it religiously and correctly, then that's exactly the way it should be done. And because it kind of it doesn't have any sort of real, you can't get your head around it, because you can't kind of apply it to any, you know, it doesn't make sense, if you know what I mean. It's one of those things that is in place, and you understand the calculations. It's quite clear what you're doing and why you're doing it, but the bearing it has on real life is not as clear cut as it should be, probably.
Okay, thank you. That was my only question.
I'll just ask a quick question. Just double checking. You can still have people off full-time furlough, can't you? I know they're sort of allowing this flexibility, but presumably it's just an option, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And yeah, if you choose to do normal furlough, full furlough as it's referred to, then so be it. And fantastic news for us. We far prefer that.
Good.
And if you do your own claim, you would too. But yeah.
Thanks for the very entertaining presentation, Steve.
It was obviously more entertaining than I'd anticipated, because I didn't realise I was on your screens, because I just saw the slides, and so it could have been very embarrassing if I'd have done something different. I could have been sort of drumming and doing other things. So good job, but yeah, I've also got a nervous twitch with my cup. So sorry.
No, it's more your dry sense of humour that I was enjoying.
Oh, you know, you've got to take it all with a pinch of salt, haven't you? So yeah, next question, please.
I've got a couple of questions.
Hi, Shirley.
Hi. You were mentioning about a spreadsheet and these extra columns and things.
Oh yeah.
We normally send our payroll as a spreadsheet. Do we then just have to put additional columns in for everybody, or do a separate spreadsheet for the furlough?
Well, are you flexibly furloughing, Shirley?
Yes.
Yeah, you are. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, at the moment, you've been carrying out your own calculations in terms of those furlough calcs, haven't you?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I would assume that, well, I know that most of yours are what we, fixed, yeah, rather than variable, aren't they? So it wouldn't be two. But yeah, if you're doing the calculations, then you certainly need to do them on the basis that I've described, bearing in mind working patterns and all the rest of it. In terms of what goes on the pay slips, I mean, when furlough first came into being, I'm absolutely sure that I saw it in the legislation that you had to detail it on pay slips, but that seemed to slip pretty quickly, along with a number of other things that were in the original draft and so now, because I think logically putting it on pay slips in terms of audit process would have been good, but totally impractical in a lot of cases. So, but yeah, those additional columns would be useful, I think.
Okay. And then the other question was, you went through all the national insurance and pension bits and bobs.
Yeah.
The calculation. I've not looked at the HMRC calculator yet for July. Is it still going to do the calculations for us?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, no, it does. Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you've got I hadn't looked at the government calculator for a couple of months until the last week or so. And yeah, it seems to work quite well. Yeah, there's always rounding issues that you have to get your head around, but apart from that, it's certainly the scenarios that I put there. I quickly ran through, and it came out with the same answer.
The same. Oh, excellent. So we just have to have more information to hand before you go anywhere near it.
Yeah, you can't get by without that usual hours calculation.
All that sort of thing. Have that to hand as well as all you used to, and then do it, and it'll.
Yeah. It will, yeah.
End. Excellent. Lovely. Thank you.
Hi.
Hey, Peter.
Hi. On the one of the slides where you were calculating the working hourly rate, you were divided by 260.
Yep.
Perhaps I'm having a senior moment, but why would it be 260?
Well, for a 5-day worker, 260 working days in the year. I mean, yeah, as I say, you know, it's.
Okay, I get it. Yeah, okay.
Because that's kind of, yeah, that's payroll territory. You know, we don't worry about calendar days, usually.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah. Anyone
Steve?
else? Hi there,
Steve?
Julian. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. I'm limping well. You look as though you're out of space.
Yeah, well, it's the best place to be at the moment, isn't it?
Just confirmation really on 2 points. One, you said this is recorded, so it would be available because Dick's not here at the moment and he would actually deal with the payroll submission. And it's important that he gets that rather than my interpretation.
Yeah.
So if I could please request, we would definitely want recorded of this. And the second thing was national minimum wage or living wage changing in April. Did I get it that you said if on furlough that didn't apply and only applies once back off furlough?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, while you're furlough, you're not working, so therefore, yeah, it just doesn't come into play.
Okay.
But it's something to be acutely aware of now, because as people come back, it's, you know, easy to accidentally not bring it into play.
Absolutely, and the majority, as you will know, the majority of our payroll, that comes into play a lot.
Yeah.
I've got a quick question, please.
Who's that? I missed
Nicola.
that.
Nicola.
Hi, Nicola. I ask because I can't see you, so how could I possibly know you raised your hand?
My face because
Hi,
I've got
Nicola.
no makeup on.
That's all right. Don't worry.
So, if we're still paying people 100%, do you actually need to know any of this until after I send the payroll submission?
No.
Do you? You don't need to know
No,
anything until after to make the claim. You only need to know after.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yes, we're blissfully unaware of it until such time
Until
as we
the
make
claim.
the claim.
Yeah. I don't think it is 100% anymore, but I'll know obviously in a few days what it is for this month.
And if it's changing, and it obviously adds to the complexity of the calculation. So, if we know in advance, that would be helpful. But
yeah. Okay. Cool. Thank you.
You're pretty good, so it's fine.
Thanks.
No problem.
Hi. We will.
No.
Hi, yeah, you okay?
Yeah, it was Tracy. Yeah. Cool.
Obviously, our payroll is slightly different because we will pay. So we might pay someone to do a 4-hour shift at £10 an hour, and then the same guy might be doing a different 4-hour shift at £13.25 an hour, for example. So I'm not entirely sure how I would work that out, or whether I just put that information on the spreadsheet and reduce their furlough amount.
Yeah, I mean, in real terms, I mean, obviously, if it's hours they've worked, then we need X hours at whatever hourly rate. In terms of the furlough calculation, we don't actually need to know. I mean, all that's critical is that we know the hour. We will know the hours that they worked during the prescribed pay period, and we'll know what they were paid for it, and that's what we need. So we can make the comparison with the reference period from the previous year, which we need to do, or we can calculate the average. So again, you're just dealing with numbers, and the actual hours worked and how they were made up don't affect the calculation at all.
Okay, so on the end of my spreadsheet that I send you, I've got one column which is the furlough amount. Do I alter that accordingly because of the hours that they're working, or do I leave you to do that?
I think I'll have to have a look at that with Graham and Tracy, and we'll
it's Graham normally.
I looked at the spreadsheet that you sent, so I won't comment, but yeah.
That's fine. And can I just say thank you very much for all the work that you all do. I'm sure it must be driving you mad.
Thank you very much for the appreciation. I mean, it is nice when people say those sort of things, and we've had quite a few people that have done it. And I can't say enough for the team around me. They're not around me, obviously, which is a bit unfortunate, but on the screen they are. But yeah, I mean, they've just carried on relentlessly. We've been under, I mean, everyone's under pressure of one sort or another, apart from the 9 million that are not. But yeah, everyone who's in work currently is under an incredible amount of pressure, be it worrying about what the business is going to do tomorrow, how you're going to make it COVID secure, whatever. So I don't, in any way think that we're unique or special in that respect. But by the same token, I think, everyone has just put in such a shift over 3 or 4 months now. Yeah. So,
I mean, I certainly randomly send Graham questions and invariably get a reply back almost immediately, which is brilliant.
Yeah, he's the most chilled of the bunch. So look at him; he's just like,
I can see.
What a question. I said to him this morning, I said, we've got to make you break a sweat at some point, because he's incredible. But yeah, everyone's incredible. I mean, Tracy is relentless in trying to keep people informed of what's going on, which is not easy because it is constantly changing. I mean, my old mentality was hunker down, hide in your bunker, and batten down the hatches. But Tracy is out there finding out what needs to be found out, communicating, and letting people know what's going on. Things like this are entirely Tracy's work. Recording it, I'm not happy about that, but there we go. What do you do?
It saves us an awful lot of work having you lot giving us all this information.
Yeah, we do our best. I mean, it's it's based on what we understand to be the case, and you get little bombshells like yesterday's furlough bonus that I don't think was trailed to the press or any of the groups that we're involved with. It's just one of those left field things, but generally speaking, we get an inkling of what's going on and try to convey that in a way that people understand. And the important thing is we've got your back, really. We are here to help you and to make sure that your employees are paid and that they understand what they're paid. We've seen numerous examples of people who've been paid strange figures that, not payrolls run by us, but associates of people within the business that you couldn't justify or understand. So we try to make it clear and try to get to the right answers, really. Never easy, but we do our best. So,
Has anybody got any other questions?
No, it's not a question.
Oh, Karen has, yeah.
Hi.
Hi, Karen.
Hi there. I came a bit late, unfortunately, to the meeting. Did you say that you were putting a recording, or are the slides going to be available?
Yeah, apparently so. Yeah,
I'll make them available. No,
apparently you get a lot of coffee drinking on it. Apparently.
Yeah, and clanking. Steve's wedding ring clanking on the cup.
Oh, I wondered what that was.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, I was thinking, can I possibly get a message to you somehow to say stop tapping the cup?
You should have unmuted and said, "Steve, you're on camera."
Yeah.
I would have known that. I would have put myself on camera, and I'd have. Anyway.
I should do my best. Actually, I'm going to try and get the recording. We have got there is a Cox&Co YouTube channel with about 1 video on it, so I might put it there, and then you could then just put the link out. But I don't know when it will come out because I'm actually on holiday as from 4 o'clock tonight, so I don't know whether I will tap in tomorrow and see if I can get it done tomorrow. For 2 weeks I'm on holiday, so but we'll try and get it to you as best as I possibly can for Monday.
Okay.
If not, Megan will deal with it on Monday.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Not a question. It's just to say thank you, Steve, and the team for doing this, because I've lost count of how many webinars about this flexible furlough scheme over the last week or so, and I haven't understood any of them. But today I've actually got a grip of how to do it. And I just want to say thank you. It's the first time I've actually followed it through and understood what's going on. So
thank you, Shirley.
That was the general hope that we would, because we've watched the HMRC stuff, and it's difficult because you have to apply it to relatively simple circumstances. Otherwise, everyone would just get lost, and there are far more complicated. But the aim is to just give a feel for the methodology that's there. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, we've been on so many webinars ourselves, Shirley, and you come away thinking, well, that's payrollers speaking to payrollers, and still it's confusing. And I think the whole point was really of today was to try and help you understand the complexity behind it from our point of view, so that if you get questioned by an employee, you have a hope to being able to explain to an employee as best as you can, so that we're not getting bombarded with every single query across 10,000 employees across our client base, because you know, the more informed you all are, the better, really.
Yeah, it's really helpful. Thank you.
Good. So Sherry normally has something to say. Sherry, have you got any questions today?
No, I haven't. Really quiet today. Thank you. Steve did a really good job. So, no, I'm just waiting for the next.
Yeah, Tracy did a good job. She does the slides and I just chat about them. So I do the easy bit.
Excellent.
Luckily for me, mostly we're straightforward, most full-time, most 5 days a week, easily contractable hours. So hopefully mine's quite straightforward, and I've already set up the timesheet with extra columns in anyway. So I'll just revisit that and make sure I have got everything that you'll need. Trying to be one step in front, because you've been helping to be one step in front. So yeah, thank you.
It's very good. Thank you. Is there anything else? Ian, are you okay?
Yeah. Well, thanks to you guys. You do
not to pick on anyone, but
just making sure I get the spreadsheet up and get it on time. But yeah, like everyone else said, thanks a lot for everything you do, and it's keeping us afloat, really.
Excellent. As long as you found it informative. I know we got Dean and Kevin, and I can see you at the bottom. I can't see your faces, but I can see the names. I don't know whether you can see us or hear us. I'm assuming you can. So Dean, is everything okay?
Yeah.
No, he can't speak. So Kevin, are you? So I can't.
Yeah, all fine with me. I pretty much leave it up to Nicola. She's the expert. You and Nicola do it all for me, so I'm just here to listen and learn, really. So thank you very much for everything.
No problem. Thank you.
And Jess, you're there in the middle. Jessica with her pink top on. So
yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you very much for this, for talking us through it, walking us and talking us through it.
Okay, excellent. Well, if there's no other questions, it's coming up for nearly an hour and a half. You've been sat there looking at us now. So if there's anything, is there anything else before we go and say goodbye? And no? Okay.
Well, we're always here, as you know. So
yeah,
yeah, happy to answer any specifics.
Yeah.
We'll certainly look at Tracy's.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Well, thank you very much for coming today. Lovely to see you all. I'm glad you found it really helpful. In some respects, it's quite good for us as well to make sure that we're being clear coming back out. So if you've taken it as if it's been clear, then that's a good sign. So yeah, excellent. Okay. Right. Okay. Like I say, I'll make the video available as soon as I possibly can. Yeah, stay safe. Stay well, and we'll speak to you all soon.
Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Thank you.